Okay, so today guys, we are in Manchester for 8-8 Live, and I am going to be playing day 1B of the £1,100 main event. Now, as you'll know, Manchester doesn't quite have the sights that the Madrids and the Barcelonas do, and it's also pissing it down outside. So we're going to be keeping this very poker focused. You may be aware that I've never cashed one of these before, and if our stay is short-lived, this will be, just like in Barcelona, converted into a cash game vlog, and I already have some extremely spicy hands to show you, so make sure that you stick around to find out what happens. But for now, we've got to go and take our seat in the main event. Wish me luck, and let's see if we can spin up a stack. Let's go.
Okay, so we are taking our seat for day 1B of the 8-8 Live Manchester main event, and we find ourselves plonked onto the feature table very briefly, where we do play one interesting hand before we are moved to the outer tables, and it's one that I'm far from proud of. The cutoff opens things up to 300, the small blind calls ace-3 off, and although you can't see it on the graphics from the stream, I look down at black kings in the big blind and make it 1500. Our man Enia goes for the call, and we go to a flop of 4-5 queen rainbow. I elect to go for larger bets on this board in cash games when 3-betting from the big blind, and since it's level 1 with 300 big blinds deep, I see no reason to deviate from the strategy I'm familiar with. I fire 1700, Enia snap calls, and we're off to a 7 of clubs turn. I think the snap call this deep does rule out some of the stronger hands Enia might have, so I feel pretty good about a large barrel here, firing out 6,000. Enia once again goes for a very quick call, so I'm expecting a good chunk of Queen X in Enia's range here as we head to a river, and the river is very favourable in the form of the King of Hearts. I've mulled this over for a while, and there's about a pot-sized bet behind here. I think given the speed of Enia's calls to this point, he's fairly unlikely to have a very good hand, with Queen X being the most prominent, maybe something like Queen 10 or Queen Jack. If he does have a set, then he's likely to shove himself anyway if I go for a smaller bet, and obviously there's the advantage of picking up some bluffs as well, no matter how unlikely that might be. For those reasons, I think a tiny bet is definitely best here, but at the time I was obsessed with getting the max and ended up jamming. I think this is a pretty significant mistake because there's nothing that pays me that wouldn't go broke versus a small bet anyway, and I eliminate any other method of getting paid other than getting heroed by a queen, which seems optimistic when we're talking about a 200 big blind river shove. I instantly regretted it, and it wasn't long before I was booted off to the outer tables to think about what I'd done. We will be making an appearance back at the feature table later though. After some uneventful hands that result in me bleeding down to 20k from my 38k peak, I look down at ace jack off in the hijack. A fairly large whopper opens the low jack to 1300, and I think this is a pretty profitable spot to call in position, so I do, and everyone else folds. The flop is king 10-8 with 2 spades, and the whopper goes for a bet of 1500. Without a backdoor flush draw, I'm definitely not in love by any means, but with the nut shot, we just have to come along and hope for the best, with a backup plan of doing some bluffing if necessary. The turn removes all need for our plan B, as we absolutely drill the tits off it in the form of the Queen of Diamonds, giving us the stone cold brass Brazilians. Our catch of the day goes for a slightly larger bet of 2500 this time, and I have a choice between small raise and a call. I have about 14k left if I call, and when I'm never folding on any river card and shouldn't have any problems getting the rest in, I prefer to just call and hope for the best. The best is absolutely what we get as the 4 of clubs rolls off on the river and our nuts are still immortal. Sadly, our whale goes for another 2500 bet, and we just have to bang it in and hope he hasn't got a fold button. Fortunately, we have the right kind of customer as he fairly swiftly flicks in a call. I announce nuts, and we get the full double to 40k back to 100 big blinds. Nice. Up next, the under the gun player, a seemingly solid reg, opens it up to 1000 at 200, 500, 500, and I defend my big blind with king 10 off. Not thrilling, but certainly mandatory, and we go to a flop of 8-7-5 with 2 spades. Certainly a favourable flop for me, given I'm going to have some straights, 2 pairs, and maybe sets that the under the gun player can't have, so I decide to go for a small dunk of 1200 into 2700, and he calls. The turn is a 9 of spades, effectively sealing my fate of bluffing off this hand. If I'm going to donk this combo, I can't see any way I'm not going to continue firing this turn. I'm going to have a shitload of value here, and I think I'd still like to bet 2 pair, given how unlikely it is that he's going to be holding a 6. So I decide to go for about half pot, 2400 into 5100. The under the gun player mulls it over again before unfortunately calling, and the river is the ace of diamonds. While this is a reg, I still think I'm going to get raised sometimes on the flop or turn by spades, and I have a spade myself, so flushes are at the very least reduced. Having said that, my spade isn't amazing, and I still want to bet a straight in this spot, of which I have many. My flushes also can't get exceptionally greedy here, as I think we will get a lot of folds, so I size around 2/3 pot, 6200 into 9900, and he goes into the tank.
This one feels bluffy to me. Something like king 4 clubs. I think I'm reaching.
Very close.
He eventually comes out of the tank with a fold after deducing there's not many things that I could be bluffing, and while I know that isn't true, I am very happy to get one through. So happy, in fact, that I windmill the king 10, which is something I definitely shouldn't do to a decent reg sitting to my direct left, but what can I say? I'm an arsehole. Ace 10 offsuit up next as we open the low jack to 1200 at 200, 500, and an extremely tight recreational flats the button before the blinds get out of the way. I'm a bit concerned about how strong this guy's range is, but my fears are allayed by the Ace 10-4 flop. I go for a small bet of 1200 and get pretty quickly raised to 3600. I'm not in love by any means, but we're not 100 big blinds deep anymore, and I can easily console myself with the fact that there's nothing I can do if he's got pocket fours. Also, a player this tight can easily flat Ace Queen and Ace King on the button and play it this way, so I think we're probably fine. The turn is the 8 of hearts, and I check with a plan of doing my bollocks as soon as possible. The board is now double flush draw, and I doubt this fella is bet folding much, so nothing else makes sense. And so it goes, he bets 5,000 and I jam for 15,200 effective. I'm relieved to see no snap, which means I can never lose barring an obscene nit roll, and he reluctantly flicks in the remainder of his stack, turning over Ace Queen of clubs. The river bricks off and we pick up some lovely chips to keep ourselves bobbing around 100 big blinds in this great structure. Any chance of making a run? We're immediately putting our new chips to work as it folds to us in the small blind with Ace 4 off, and I open to 1900 at 300, 600. Our reggie friend from the King 10 offhand defends, and it seems about right that I get my comeuppance for earlier now. That does seem unlikely though, as we go to a flop of Ace, Ace, 8 rainbow, and I decide to check, which I think is important versus a competent opponent. I definitely don't want to bet all of my Ace-X mindlessly, and trapping some of my worst ones does seem good. He checks back and the turn is the Jack of Hearts, so it's time to get some value. I bet 1400 into 4400, hoping for some light tag-alongs, but what we get instead is a raise to 3700. A tiny raise, almost like he thinks I never check an ace on the flop and he can buy some cheap pots with this little click. Thankfully, I have a pretty simple decision, and I do expect to win this pot most of the time one way or another against this fella. The river's the deuce of spades, which is almost certainly under bluffed, but I'm hoping he feels he can leverage me off a jack with the abundance of garbage he raised the turn with. He bets 10,200 into 11,900, which makes sense since the board is insanely dry and I'm unlikely to fold many of my hands to smaller bets. I take a moment to hate my life before flicking in the call, and unfortunately on this occasion he tables Ace 10 for the winner. I flash the ace and he offers an audible noise of acceptance that he got a bit fortunate. Still, these things happen and we're still right in the mix moving deeper into the day. We're hovering just below the 100 big blind safety net as I open to 1300 at 300, 600 with pocket fours. The small blind calls before Mr. Chips, a shameless bum hunter from the online streets, makes it a measly 4,500 to go from the big blind. I am never folding this for that price, so I call before the small blind surprisingly gets out of the way. The flop is 9-8-5 with 2 diamonds and I'm already itching to triple barrel. It's a great board for me, and I think Mr. Chips is going to be under squeezing this spot, leading him to be overpair and high card heavy, giving me a great chance to eventually win this pot. He checks, as he should do a lot, maybe always, and I start enacting the plan, betting 3,200 into 10,300, and he calls. The turn is the 7 of clubs, which is definitely the kind of card I was looking for, and obviously Mr. Chips checks a second time. I still want to bet 2 pet and sets here for value, which leads me towards a small size, not to mention that pretty much his whole range hates facing any bet size here. It also means if he does get sticky, I'll get more folds on the river than if I used a larger bet and got called. I fire about 1/3 pot, 5,700 into 16,700, and he gets the message this time and folds before asking me to show a bluff.
Got a bluff, it's good for the game. Can't show a bluff this time.
Always nice to get one past a bum-hunting shit stain like Mr. Chips, and we are back in business at 100 big blinds. Super interesting one up next, which I think might be absolutely class, but I'm ready to be told otherwise. The low jack opens to 1,500 and I call pocket 8s out of the small blind before the problematic reg from previous hands makes a proper squeeze to 7,500. After the low jack flicks in the call, I don't see what other choice I have other than to pop the money in and pray for a snowman. No snowman in sight though on jack 9-6 with 2 spades, but after I check and the big blind checks, the low jack takes his time before tapping the table as well. The turn is one of the more acceptable ones, the 7 of clubs, and I start to consider my options. Checking doesn't feel amazing because if I check and see a bet, I won't love any of my options too much. Given that I called out the small blind and we checked through on the flop, I have a chunk of sets in my range that are definitely going to want to start betting. I also just give myself a much better chance of winning a pot than if I were to go for a dubious check call, whether that be immediately on the turn or after a potential river barrel. I decide to size up to apply maximum pressure to what I assume are relatively capped ranges, other than the big blind's obvious potential to have jacks. I also think he's in a horrific spot in the sandwich with the overpairs that I assume are all still in his range when I bet. So I load the gun and launch a chunky 14.2k bet. The big blind snap folds and the low jack ponders briefly before relinquishing as well. I have to say I think my instincts in these spots have improved massively recently, and I'm glad I'm finding these sorts of bets even if it is a little questionable. Aggression has certainly been lacking from my game in tournaments over the years, and this is long overdue violence that I'm beginning to exhibit. We're now up to a very tidy 80k and keeping at triple digit big blinds before we move to a new much worse table with a familiar face. None other than Weasel 1991, 2 seats to my left. left. Unfortunately for our tournament hopes, I hit a stretch of 90 minutes without a single hand even close to an open. I think I was at least 5 pips off a respectable starting hand for the duration of my stay, and that resulted in a sad dwindle down to 25 big blinds. Just as I begin to voice my frustration, I peeked down at aces on the button with the added benefit of Mr. Rubberthon in the big blind. I opened to 4,000 at 1,000, 2,000, praying to every single deity that I don't believe in to get shoved on by Mark and given the full 5-minute slow roll. Unfortunately, he ends up calling after a little deliberation, and we're off to a flop of Jack 8-8 rainbow. Mark checks, and I decide to throw in a check back, and the turn is the Queen of Clubs. Mark checks again, and now I think betting is in order, so I fire out 5,300, but unfortunately he folds pretty quickly. I obviously show him the aces, and he says he was 2 pips off a jam pre-flop, which is incredibly sad to hear. Oh well, we finally won a pot, and with 2 minutes to go before the break, we're told we're moving to the TV table. One for the fans, as battling Mark at around 25 big blinds effective could result in some blood being spilled, most likely mine, but you'll know that Mark absolutely hates the limelight, so much so that he banged his ace-5 suited in over an under the gun open and a call before eventually succumbing to pocket jacks and taking his leave. Just me off to the feature then. And no sooner are we sat at the feature table than we find ourselves with a clear jam 6-handed against a very competent opponent under the gun in Matt Davenport, but sadly for us, it's the same old story.
Matt's going to probably have the widest gun opening range of the table. Unfortunately, some of the time,
you have it.
The man will wake up with it as he does. And there's the ISO.
And here comes the collection of the bag and the phone, and put his earpods away, stand up.
Finish the water. If only he had 8's tower, he'd be favourite.
He would.
So, Easty.
Root for the 7, everybody. Root for the 7. It's none of anything.
4 or 5 for some sweats.
Yes.
George just put the 7 there.
4, 5 or a 7.
Boring old 3 on the turn,
Yeah.
so Easty down to 2 outs.
Needs a 7. 7! And he's nice and 8.
I told you if he had 8s he would have won. 8 on the end. Easty says, I can't believe it. I watched you on stream the last 12 months. You've never had a hand. The one time I move all in, you have a hand. Of course you do, he's probably saying. Of course he's got queens, Easty's probably saying.
Unlucky. Nick Eastwood, out he goes. 7s into Matt Davenport's queens.
Might see Easty back in the mix tomorrow.
Yes. Definitely see him on the Ambassadors sitting up.
Contrary to the commentary at the end there, we did not find ourselves back in this particular tournament, and that was our run over for this 8-8 Live main event. I thought I played okay, but that run of no hands after my table move earlier just killed any momentum I had, and I never recovered. We will have a quick look at my stints in the side events in Manchester, but first, as promised, we did have some extremely spicy cash game hands that I can't wait to share with you. So just to give you an idea of the kind of thing to expect on this particular table, let's start with a 7 of diamonds. Open the low jack 6-handed to £7 before we get a rather exciting announcement from the cutoff.
Raise 7. 17 blind. Re-raise 17 blind. I can't say that. No, but I can.
The cutoff is dead set on letting everyone know that he's gone for the blind 3-bet here, and while it's prudent to be afraid of the Tony G angle, I was watching and he indeed did not look. The small blind, another interesting fellow. Cold calls the small blind, and Old Man Coffee in the big blind comes along as well. The flop is Queen 9-9 with 2 diamonds, and we all check to the cutoff, who bets 50 and begins mouthing off again.
You wouldn't believe it. You couldn't rate it.
It folds to me and I have a decision. Even though he's blind pre-flop, he has bet into 3 players on a board that should at least hit one of them. He's got about 250 left, and honestly I think this decision is pretty easy. I need to shove. He could be absolutely full of shit, and even if he's not, I have equity against everything. Not to mention that he starts piping up and aggressively stacking his chips.
Put them all in. Come on. Come on. Don't pay 30. Oh, 15. Thanks for your donation.
I end up calling, not a disaster, but not good, and the turn bricks off in the 7 of clubs. Not much I can do now but check, which is the problem with only calling flop, and he quickly flicks in 100 and starts goading me again.
Thanks for your donation.
I pretty much have to let it go, and I quickly stop my recording, which is unfortunate for myself and for you guys because he absolutely windmills 5-3 off in my face. Annoying for sure, and I've clearly fucked this one up, but it's never bad to have a geezer blind raising and doing off at every opportunity. Someone's going to get him. I just have to get my head out of my arse and give myself a chance of it being me. The next hand is one of the 2 utterly utterly egregious, borderline cheating hands I've played in this year. I've not shared the first one on this channel, and it's a hell of a lot worse due to the fact that I want to keep playing the casino in question, and I cannot imagine they'd want me showing it, but maybe one day. We are going to show this one though, and while it's not against our blind friend, it is against the other whop job we alluded to in the last hand. He's been very active and pretty splashy, so we're definitely excited when he makes it 20 in the hijack and I look down at ace king in the small blind. I bump it up to £80 and then something utterly obscene happens that I've never experienced before in a poker hand. It folds round to whop whop, and listen to this.
Excuse me. Can I get a vodka and coke and
The usual.
So you drink?
No, thank you.
Get this one.
Before I take all your tips, I want to give you. Anybody on right? How much more?
Here.
What's the total?
80.
Was that 50 you took off there?
Huh?
Was that 50?
I give it 50.
Okay. Mid hand?
Huh? No, I just give it a drink.
You can use that.
But I'm going to feel sorry if he after this hand, you see.
So to summarise, our man's waited for the action to get to him and then asked everyone at the table if they want to drink before calling my raise. He's then paid for said round off of his stack, meaning after calling he only has £315 rather than 365, which is a pretty significant difference. I'm pretty confident this is absolutely horseshit, but I'd love to hear your thoughts about this in the comments down below so I can establish just how out of line this actually is, or maybe if I'm overreacting. I considered speaking up mid-hand, but I wasn't really sure how to play it, not to mention the flop was dealt out and I wasn't a big fan anyway. You could make an argument for using it against him by insisting it to be put back on his stack to feign strength and maybe get a fold, but I wasn't thinking that clearly or indeed deceptively at that time. To the action in question then, as we're off to 7 deuce deuce with 2 diamonds and £173 in the middle. Naturally I want to size up here in general, but I have to size down a little due to the fact he's taken chips off his stack mid-hand. I proceed with 75 quid and the hand continues its rather strange trajectory.
What? 75. All in.
An account, please.
You don't need a count, just through. It's not even that much.
564.
How much?
564.
How can it be 564? That's not right. 314.
314.
Here, use my tipsy on. I would call that with a fucking shade that I folded.
I'll actually buy you 290 full.
And the t-shirt too.
Chips.
Oh fuck, I fuck off.
Oh,
Fuck us, say it's cold.
Yeah.
Nice hand.
I mean, you have been pissing about a little bit.
Oh, it's not a bad hand. That's fucking serious. Come on.
So what happened there then, apart from the obvious? I think firstly and most importantly, this fella has been very involved in the game, and even though I've not seen a serious punt, he's ordering drinks and generally splashing about, so ruling out a random bluff, even on a board like this, is out of the question. That already increases my equity at least somewhat, and then it's 240 to win 562, so I need about 30% equity for a profitable call. 30% random spazzes seem plausible, but just to push me over the line, I need a little bit more. Not holding the ace of diamonds is really good as we unblock all the ace X flush draws that I assume it's safe to say this geezer would shove, and the king of diamonds provides some backdoor equity when this isn't the case, or blocks his flush out when it is. Lastly, and maybe most importantly, I think we can rule out all traps like aces and kings, because who the fuck is giving £50 to a waitress mid-hand when you've got aces or kings? This means that any pair I'm against, I have 2 overs and a backdoor flush draw, and if he has no pair, I'm miles ahead. All in all, I think this is a pretty easy call, all things considered, and I have him to thank for taking 50 off his stack and giving me a better price than the call off anyway. To summarise, get wrecked. A small one up next, but I think a good spot to bring up. The cutoff opens to a tenner and I decide to just call in the big blind with ace-5 of hearts. Certainly a reasonable 3-bet, but both options are completely fine and we're off to a flop of 7-5-4 with 2 clubs. I decide to donk, although I'm not sure we have the biggest advantage here in the world. Maybe a few more 2 pairs and a couple of straights, but I think it's completely fine. I bet 7 into 21 and he fairly quickly calls. The turn brings the 8 of clubs, which I'd definitely be blasting off a lot on. And if I bluff this as well as all my single club hands, then I'd definitely be overdoing it. After a short pause, he checks back and the river is the 10 of clubs, bringing a 4 flush, and I decide to check again, hoping to sometimes win and check. The cutoff, however, decides to bet out 20 into 35, and we have quite an interesting spot, all things considered.
Oh, this is a fun one. How much is that? 50?
20.
20?
So on the face of it, I think a lot of people would advocate for a snap fold here, but I think it's a pretty significant error to do so. The first thing I'm asking myself here is if I'm ever going to lose to bluffs if I call, and I think that's really unlikely that he'd be bluffing a pair better than the 5. Given that I'm saying I have a bluff catcher, i.e. I beat all bluffs, I need to decide whether this is overbluffed or underbluffed. I'd say this spot is quite clearly overbluffed due to how unfiltered the cutoff is. I doubt he'd fold many overcard hands on the flop to my small donk, and I expect all made flushes on the turn to start betting, and maybe some single club hands as well. The fact is that if he floats all of his overcard combos on the flop, then he's going to have a massive density of overcard combos on the river that feel like they can never show down and have to bluff. He will certainly have some flushes like queen jack off with a club, but we only need to win about a third of the time here to make money, and if I'm giving him all the offsuit and suited overcard combos that don't contain a club, he's going to be overdoing it significantly. In these situations, I rarely end up folding, so let's hope we pick one off this time.
Go on!
Huh?
Go on!
I wish. I might as well have a 6.
Rory's story.
Thing is, you probably just float every single over on the flop.
There we go. There's a value.
I need you to have king queen offsuit with no club.
This is that thing that's cool. Where's Rory? Rory, take the Rory. No club, no club.
So on this occasion, we do pick it off, and it's always satisfying to win one like this. It's important to give this kind of decision some thought, as I think a lot of people avoid these kind of hands for better spots, when this is actually a pretty good spot itself. So it's been a very decent start, and we're now hovering around the £900 mark from an initial 500. Some sub-context for this next hand, as just the week before I had a bum hunter on my 100L tables going by the name of I'm Here to Punt. I have a love-hate relationship with bum hunters, since I actually quite like the ones that give me a heads up before dipping in the pool, but the ones that say nothing and I have to figure out their intentions really piss me off. Thankfully, this guy is the former and a very nice lad, as I found out when he introduced himself to me as he sat in my 1-2 game. Usually bum hunters don't take it to these lengths, but it was clearly time to strap in for a battle. Regardless, I'd not seen him do anything ridiculous at this point, and it's clear that for almost anyone, deep 1-2 live is a bit more impactful to a bankroll than 100L online. So while the dynamic is obviously present and I'm aware of it, I'm not sure how up to it this guy is just yet. It's also very clear that he's very competent despite said dynamic. So we bear all that in mind as I'm Here to Punt opens to £8 from the hijack, the cutoff calls, and we look down at the boots from the small blind. It's important to note that we are deep as shit here, as he's managed to take the blind man for all he's worth while I've been chipping up as well. As a result, I'm making this massive, particularly as I know he's going to want to take flops in position against me. I make it £55 and he predictably calls, and I throw in some ill-advised banter.
You got what you wanted. You just didn't think it was going to be here.
The cutoff gets out the way and we go heads up to a flop of Jack 10-5 rainbow. Now 100 big blinds deep, you're pretty happy accepting your fate here, but we are bordering on 500 big blinds deep, making anything but the nuts fairly unappetizing. Still, I'm starting out with a bet of 66 into 120 here, knowing that he's going to have a lot of continues on this board. I'm obviously concerned about the sets, but obviously that's not his whole range, and I'm ahead a vast majority of the time here. In these spots, especially against this opponent, you just have to strap in and get ready to do your bollocks if necessary.
If you fold, then no.
My new friend calls after a short deliberation, which is not unexpected, and the dealer fists me in the ass in the form of the Jack of Spades. Far from my favourite card, and even though I do have a good amount of Jack Hex myself, I think this is likely to favour imposition in general. It also just feels incredibly ugly to keep sticking money in here this deep, and there's a chance this guy calls with some offsuit Jack X pre-flop to get in the mix against me, which is now thoroughly unideal. I check, preparing my anus, and he takes some time before firing 115 into 250. Really nothing to say here. I don't think we can raise. We're never folding, so I pop in the £115 to see the river. The river is the 3 of clubs, and I check it over again. This river is interesting in that he may bet a lot of hands on the turn for this sizing, like a 10 for example, to stunt the action and quickly check back river. He doesn't check though and begins assembling a rather large pile of blacks worth £25 each. Once he's finished, he slides £375 into the £480 pot, and we have a decision on our hands.
I got a question. Are you here to punt? Do you know what's so sick about this? Is he's literally bum hunts me online. And then I find myself in these spots, and it's like, he knows that I know. And it's just so fucking sick. Why can't I ever just play a normal hand of poker in my fucking life?
Watch your online.
The first and most important question is whether we beat value. I think this is grossly thin with queens, and I think I always get 4-bet by kings, so I'm ruling those out. That means I think this hand is a pure bluff catcher and I need to decide whether to call it. So is it overbluffed or underbluffed? Against most people, this bricky of a river is most certainly underbluffed, but I can definitely see this guy betting turn with king, queen and the like and not wanting to check back the river. He's also saying that he has at least a jack, so any removal to that is hugely positive if I feel the decision is close, which I think it is. Having two red aces blocks both ace-jack suited combinations, and although I did stipulate that he might call offsuit broadways pre, leaving with a lot of jack X, that would also give him a lot of ace-queen off and king-queen off, so I'm calling it a wash. And if we need anything more, it's a guy that proudly announced he was bum hunting me online, and if anyone is likely to be defining creative bluff here, it's probably going to be him. Not thrilled, but I think this is just a call, all things considered.
Oh, he's done it.
Yeah, well done.
You absolute stain. You absolute. What do you want me to do? No. He's not representing a worse hand than this. I have a bluff catcher.
Fuck you.
I roll in the money, he flips over ace queen suited for the missed gut shot on flush draw, and we win this round. So off to round 2 then, as he opens hijack again, this time to £17 in a straddled pot, and I decide to call in the small blind with pocket eights. Optional, but this deep certainly just as reasonable as 3-bet, especially when there's a whop job in the big blind. Just us off to the flop though on this occasion, and he has about 700, which is the effective stack, meaning we're deep as fuck again. The flop is 6-5-4 with 2 clubs, which seems better for me, but I think he will have all the same 2 pairs, sets and straights as me, as well as the other overpairs that I don't have. So I decide not to donk here. He goes for about half pot, 20 into 41, and I think my only option here is to call, so that's what I do. The turn is the 9 of diamonds, which I certainly won't be donking, and when I check it over to him, he fires out again, this time for 70 into 80. I'm a pretty big fan of this sizing in general, and I think my only option is to call again, but there's a chance this is pretty borderline against some opponents. I think against this guy, we're going to have to be getting our stick on, as Ben likes to say, and since it's his money anyway, we better follow his advice. The river is a disappointing king of spades, and I check again, and this time he sizes down somewhat, betting 135 into 221. After potting the turn, I'm surprised to see this, since I think all the good hands that he would pot on the turn are still going to be worth more than this on the river. So I'm already pretty suspicious, but this sizing is also not especially bluffy and looks a lot more like a face-up attempt to get some finished value. Something like queens makes sense, or maybe a random king that backed into top pair. Given that I double block the straight, it seems a reasonable candidate to go for a bluff raise on the face of it. I think it's easy to get into the trap of therefore using this combo as an all-in rather than using a smaller raise size, and the biggest problem I have with that is I think I'd always raise a previous street with the nuts. I therefore prefer something that looks a lot like a value raise myself, credibly repping a lot of 2 pairs or sets that didn't raise a turn but are now looking to secure value against a probable medium strength hand on the river. So that's what I go for, raising to £355, and he goes into the tank. I don't get any chat from him, but we get something a lot better.
6s or 7-8. It's one of the 2. Oh my goodness, he's amazing.
It's a punt, bro.
He bluffed.
Naturally, this is a mandatory windmill into his face in this dynamic, so I fling my cards into the middle for him to get a good look, and throw a needle in there as well. While there's nothing quite as tilting as doing it after bum hunters, there's also nothing quite as satisfying as pissing all over them. Still, he was very gracious in defeat, and as I said, a very nice lad, so maybe he didn't deserve it. Nah, fuck him. A cheeky one to top things off as I announce I'm leaving before my big blind, which I always do in case I stack someone and they think I'm hit and running. I look down at jacks and bump it up to a tenner, which the big blind, short stacking at around 90 quid, calls. Seems like a good chance for a hit and run, come to think of it. The flop is very hit and runny, king, queen, jack, rainbow, and he checks. This isn't anywhere near as complex as the other spots here, so I won't waste much time. I bet 6 quid and he calls. With turn is a 7 of clubs and he checks again. I go for another bet, this time for £35, and he calls again. He has 53 left heading into the river, which is a pure brick, the 3 of clubs. He checks a 3rd time and I'm obviously shoving, but I give it a little Hollywood before putting him in.
I think one of them would have sufficed.
The dealer is actually out of line here because the reason I use a lot of chips to shove here is to make it look intimidating for the recreational and make it seem like I'm just trying to bully him off the pot. So he's doing me a favor by bringing attention to it. After a little dwell up, we hear those lovely words that you only hear in the wonderful arena of live poker.
Set.
So we take another down, bringing our profits to around £1,200 for our 3 hours of work. Some very interesting hands along the way, and although I started off by misplaying, I felt pretty good about my play in this session. Now all there is left to do is see out this vlog how I usually do, which is by blasting it off in the side events and showing you the damage. An absolute classic up first as I built myself a very nice early chip stack in the £180 rumble. I open kings under the gun and get 3-bet in the low jack to 3,000 by someone that looks like they love 3-betting, and I toss on the 4-bet to 8,600. He spends some time mulling it over before deciding to 5-bet jam for 75 big blinds, and I may fold this in the main event, but I'm certainly not folding here.
I'm not folding this in the fucking rumble, but I guess I should.
No folding kings, yeah?
Good luck.
Yeah, good luck, mate.
So not only have I managed to find the one nerd mental enough to 5-bet jam ace-5 suited for 75 big blinds in the early levels of a side event, I've managed to lose as well. That was for 150 big blinds and the overwhelming chip lead, but never mind. My side event pain continues, but it is drawn out a little bit first. Very soon after, we are banging in the remnants of our stack with 10s and we're off to the races. Top set is a good start and the runners don't come, so we're back in the mix and ready to go again. More pure skill coming up as it's time to bang it in again with ace king and we get the rejam from queens. I'd love to save some of these flips for a main event where I don't have fumes, but we'll take what we can get, and who knows, maybe we can find a way back into this one. I get moved to a new table and I'm instantly dealt aces, which I'd classify as reasonable, especially as Under the Gun opens things up to 2,600 at 600, 1,200, and I 3-bet Under the Gun 1 to 7,100. Once it gets back to him, he fairly quickly shoves and I just as quickly call. Aces versus 10s for a real foothold in this one. We win another one and we're now actually in the mix with about 3 tables left and 4k up top. I have to say, winning all in seems pretty strong, and it's something I'm considering incorporating into my game moving forward. So far we've only had all ins, but this hand is actually pretty interesting. I open Under the Gun to 3,300 and the big blind, the player with 10s from the previous hand, defends his big blind. I'm calling him king of the world because it's very obvious he thinks he's better than everyone else on the table. We go to a flop of king 9-4, which we both check, and then do so again on the 7 of hearts turn. On the river though, things spice up quite a bit as the big blind bets 2,500 into 9,000, and we have a decision. We don't need to win often at all, so calling is very reasonable, but I think it's more likely, given that we're against the big blind, that he has something like a 5 or a 7 that's going for a small value bet. It's very reasonable to me to raise a 9 here if I have one, and certainly a king, and I think raising is going to be just slightly more profitable overall. I bump it up to 8,100 and he doesn't snap fold, which I wasn't expecting anyway, but after a tank he announces 18,500 and my curiosity is peaking. Live players generally don't block bet with good value hands, and the most likely hands for value here are 8-6 or 5-5, both of which I expect bigger bets from on the river. Any 7 or 5 is surely just more likely to call if they think I'm full of shit, but although I really want to own him here and make a sick call, there is a chance I just lose to a hand turning itself into a bluff in an attempt to get me to fold a king. As a result, I do end up reluctantly letting it go, and the 4-2 off is windmilled in my face. I really wish I'd called here, as it would have been well worth forcing him to turn over 4 high and tabling an ace high winner, but fair play, he did get me. Does make me wonder though how I find people 5-bet jamming ace 5 suited and 3-bet bluffing 4 high on the river in these side events, but maybe they just really don't like me. Nothing too interesting happened after that, as I found myself card dead approaching the final 2 tables, and I shoved my last 35k at the 3,000, 6,000 level with king 10 suited. I found a pretty good spot for my money, all things considered, in a 3-way all in, and winning this one would put me in great shape.
No. Fuck. That's fine. What you got? That's fine as well. That's completely fine.
I got more than a chance. I got the nut. Oh, never mind. I'll go fuck myself. Oh, queen.
Queen.
GG's.
Unfortunately, we couldn't manage it this time around, and we were out in 16th place with 9 paid. There was one more chance for tournament glory in the closer, and I went for the absolute max late reg with 10 big blinds, so let's see how that panned out.
Dealer. I'm all in. No? I think that was a no.
All in. We win.
All in. I got loads, mate. Easy.
Again.
Doesn't look like it, but I actually went pretty deep here, coming 12th with 10 paid. Still no cigar and nothing to write home about for Manchester, but plenty of opportunities are still on the horizon. I'm hoping something sticks soon. Thanks a lot for watching, and I will see you on the next one.